Chapter 1: The war was not declared. It simply arrived. One system at a time, the lights went out. Communication relays stopped responding. Trade routes went silent. Then came the refugee ships, damaged, overcrowded, broadcasting the same fragmented warnings before their power failed entirely. The Karth Dominion had crossed the border. The Aurelian Compact had known it would happen eventually. Everyone did. The Karth did not negotiate, did not posture, did not issue ultimatums. They expanded the way gravity expanded, inevitably, impartially, and without regard for what lay in the way. Still, knowing something would happen and watching it unfold were very different experiences. The first Aurelian fleet engagement lasted 11 minutes. The second lasted 9. By the time the third fleet was lost, the Compact stopped pretending this was a conventional war. The Karth ships were not faster. They were not larger. Their weapons were not more powerful in any raw sense. What made them unstoppable was something far worse. They adapted perfectly. Every Aurelian tactic worked exactly once. The second time it was attempted, the Karth had already adjusted. Shield harmonics were countered before frequencies could be rotated. Formation maneuvers were anticipated. Electronic warfare found nothing to disrupt, as if the Karth had already modeled every possible interference pattern before the first signal was ever sent. The Aurelians were fighting an enemy that learned faster than experience itself. On the 7th month of continuous losses, the Compact Council convened in emergency session. The chamber was carved from living crystal, its walls softly refracting starlight into patterns meant to inspire calm. That design choice failed utterly. Fleet commanders argued with strategists. Strategists argued with economists. Economists argued with reality. Reality did not argue back. A projection hovered above the central table, displaying the current front. Red vectors pushed inexorably inward, swallowing systems with cold precision. There were no flanking maneuvers, no feints. The Karth advanced straight through resistance, reducing everything to solvable variables. High Strategist Valith finally silenced the chamber with a gesture. "We are out of options," she said. The words landed heavily. Aurelians did not speak like that lightly. Their entire culture was built on the assumption that with enough preparation, any crisis could be managed. Yet here they were. Fleet reserves were depleted. Industrial output could not keep pace with losses. Civilian evacuation capacity had already been exceeded. Within 4 months, the Karth would reach the inner systems. Within 6, the Compact would cease to exist. "What remains untried?" Valith asked. Silence answered. Then hesitantly, a junior intelligence delegate spoke. "There is one possibility." Every eye turned toward him. He swallowed. Humanity. The chamber reacted instantly. Disbelief, dismissal, quiet fear. Humans were new by galactic standards, loud, fractious, politically unstable. Their internal conflicts were legendary. They lacked the unified doctrine the Aurelians prized. And yet, every conflict humans entered ended strangely. Not always quickly, not always cleanly, but it ended. "No," one fleet commander said immediately. "They are unreliable. They are inefficient," another added. "They fight dishonorably," a third muttered. Valith listened to all of it, then asked a single question. "Have they ever lost?" No one answered, because the truth was uncomfortable. Humanity did not win wars the way others did. They did not seek decisive battles or symbolic victories. When humans fought, something fundamental changed. Systems collapsed. Enemies fractured. Conflicts stopped making sense. The cost was always high. The outcome was always final. Valith closed her eyes briefly. "Send the request," she said. The transmission was stripped of rhetoric, of pride, of politics. It contained no demands and no assumptions. Only facts, enemy capabilities, current losses, projected extinction timelines, and one final line added after long deliberation. If survival is still possible, we ask you to show us how. The message vanished into the void. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then a signal appeared at the edge of compact space. A single vessel, small, unmarked, alone. The Aurelians watched its approach in silence, an unspoken realization spreading through the chamber. They had not sent an army. They had sent humanity. Chapter 2. The human ship did not request permission to dock. It transmitted a single navigation packet, precise to the microsecond, and aligned itself with the primary Aurelian station, as if it had been built for it. Traffic control officers watched in uneasy silence as the vessel slipped through layered defense grids that had been calibrated for centuries to repel intruders. The systems did not fail. They simply accepted the presence. That disturbed the Aurelians more than a forced breach would have. When the airlock cycled open, 4 humans stepped out. They did not pause to admire the architecture. They did not hesitate under the scrutiny of armed guards and hovering sensor arrays. They walked forward at a natural pace, not rushed, not cautious, as though they were arriving at a place they had already been. The one in front appeared older than the others, his movements economical, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested confidence without arrogance. His eyes tracked the space instinctively, cataloging exits, distances, and the subtle shifts of personnel who did not yet realize they were being observed. "I'm Elias Ward," he said, his voice even. "This is my team." No titles followed, no ranks. The Aurelian high strategist Valeth studied him carefully. Humans were physically unimpressive by compact standards, shorter, lighter, lacking natural armor or enhanced sensory organs. And yet something about Ward's presence made the room feel smaller. "You were asked for military assistance," Valeth said. "You arrived with 4 individuals and no visible assets." Ward nodded once. "Correct." A fleet commander leaned forward, irritation flickering across his bioluminescent crest. "Is this some kind of reconnaissance, an evaluation before you commit real forces?" "No," Ward replied, "this is the real force." The statement was not delivered with bravado. That made it worse. Valeth dismissed the guards with a gesture. "Explain." Ward didn't launch into a speech. He turned instead to the projection of the war front hovering above the chamber. Red vectors advanced inward, cold and inexorable. "You're fighting the Karth Dominion the way you fight everyone else," he said. "That's not a criticism, it's an observation." "They are an enemy," the fleet commander said. "We respond with force, and they respond with adaptation," Ward said, "which is why this ends the same way every time." He gestured, and one of the other humans, shorter, younger, eyes sharp with barely contained intensity, stepped forward and began interfacing with the projection without asking permission. Data layers shifted, timelines compressed, engagements replayed in accelerated sequence. Patterns emerged. The Aurelians had seen these battles before, but never like this. The human rewound, overlaid, and aligned engagements separated by months and parsecs. The Karth responses were identical in structure, differing only in scale. "They're not reacting to your tactics," Ward said. "They're reacting to your intent." "That's impossible," an Aurelian strategist objected. "Intent cannot be measured." Ward glanced at him. "Humans measure it all the time." Silence fell. "We learned a long time ago," Ward continued, "that the most dangerous thing in any conflict is predictability disguised as reason. You escalate logically. You defend proportionally. You commit reserves when projections demand it." He looked back at Valeth. "From the Karth's perspective, you're not fighting them. You're feeding them training data." The word struck harder than any accusation. Valeth's mandibles tightened. "Then what do you propose?" Ward finally turned away from the display and faced the council directly. "We stop trying to win," he said. Outrage rippled through the chamber. "That is unacceptable," the fleet commander snapped. "It's inevitable," Ward replied calmly. "What's unacceptable is pretending otherwise." One of the humans' tall, quiet eyes like still water spoke for the first time. "You can't outfight the Karth. You can't outbuild them. You can't outlearn them. Then why are you here?" Valeth demanded. Ward answered without hesitation. To change the question. He requested access, full access, not just to military archives but to economic data, civilian infrastructure, industrial logistics, and internal governance protocols. The Aurelians balked at this. No ally had ever been granted such breadth of information. "This borders on surrender," one council member warned. Ward nodded. "Yes, that's why it works." Valeth studied him for a long moment. Then, against the protests of half the chamber, she authorized provisional access. What followed unsettled everyone. The humans did not convene war councils. They did not draft new battle plans. They embedded themselves quietly within Aurelian systems, observing without commentary. They watched supply chains. They traced decision pathways. They mapped not just what the compact did, but how long it took to decide to do it. They asked questions no one had thought to ask. Why were civilian evacuation routes prioritized the way they were? Why did manufacturing queues favor replacement over redundancy? Why did command authority centralize during crises instead of fragmenting? Every answer revealed another assumption. After 48 hours, Ward requested a private meeting with Valeth. When she arrived, she found him standing alone before a simplified projection of Aurelian space. The red vectors were still there, closer now. "You are losing because you believe this is a war," Ward said without preamble. "It is," Valeth replied. "No," he said softly, "it's a systems failure." She stared at him. "The Karth don't conquer," Ward continued. "They optimize. You exist as an inefficiency in their expansion model. They are correcting you." Valeth's voice dropped. "Then what does humanity do when it faces an inefficiency?" Ward met her gaze. "We make it irrelevant." The plan he outlined was not a counteroffensive. It was a surrender, carefully engineered, deliberately incomplete, and catastrophically misleading. They would lay down arms in specific systems. Broadcast capitulation on channels the Karth could not ignore. Simultaneously, they would alter economic outputs, data traffic, and civilian movement patterns in ways that were individually harmless but collectively poisonous to predictive models. They would become noise, not chaos, not randomness, structured contradiction. "The Karth need clean data," Ward said. "We're going to give them data that's true and useless." Valeth realized with a chill that this was not a strategy her people would ever have devised. It required abandoning pride, accepting vulnerability, letting go of the idea that resistance must look like resistance. "When do we begin?" she asked. Ward checked the time. "Immediately," he said, "before they realize we've stopped fighting." Outside the station, Karth fleets continued their advance. They had no reason to suspect that the war they thought they were winning had already changed into something they could not understand. And for the first time since the invasion began, the Aurelians felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the fear. Not hope. Control. Chapter 3. The surrender broadcast went out at exactly the time the Karth models predicted it would. That, more than anything else, ensured it would be believed. Across the compact, Aurelian command channels carried the same message in every dialect and format required by interstellar protocol. Defensive operations were ceasing. Fleet movements were standing down. Resistance was no longer viable. The compact acknowledged defeat. The message was honest. It simply was not complete. Karth forward units did not celebrate. Celebration implied emotion, and emotion implied inefficiency. Instead, their fleets adjusted vectors, reclassified Aurelian systems from contested to acquired, and accelerated assimilation schedules accordingly. To the Karth, surrender was not a victory. It was a confirmation. Inside Aurelian space, everything changed. Weapons platforms powered down exactly as ordered. Fleets retreated from visible positions. Shipyards halted production of armaments and shifted to civilian-grade output. Traffic patterns smoothed, becoming orderly, predictable, and, on the surface, compliant. And beneath that surface, humanity went to work. Ward's team did not issue commands. They made suggestions, small ones, framed as efficiency improvements. They encouraged regional governors to interpret surrender protocols flexibly. They advised logistics planners to prioritize stability over throughput. They introduced procedural delays that were individually insignificant and collectively devastating. Civilian transports were rerouted not to safe hubs, but to marginal systems with low strategic value. Data packets were duplicated, fragmented, and reassembled in ways that preserved accuracy while destroying coherence. Economic outputs were reported honestly, but with timing offsets that caused predictive algorithms to desynchronize. The Aurelians felt like they were dismantling themselves. That was the hardest part. "We are hollowing out our own civilization," one governor whispered during a closed session. "No," Ward replied. "You're making yourselves unprofitable." The Karth advance slowed, not dramatically, not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to register as a rounding error. Then another. Then a third. Karth optimization cores recalculated. Expansion timelines were adjusted. Resource allocation was revised. Every revision made the next one harder. Because the data coming in from Aurelian space was correct. There were no lies to filter out. No sabotage to isolate. No obvious attack to counter. The compact was producing what it claimed to be producing, moving where it said it was moving, surrendering exactly as promised. And yet, nothing lined up. Assimilation units arrived at worlds that had already been evacuated, peacefully, lawfully, with paperwork filed in advance. Resource extraction fleets found stockpiles that met quotas but were located in systems that required disproportionate transit costs to maintain. Administrative nodes encountered decision trees that technically resolved, but only after delays that cascaded into further inefficiencies. The Karth did not understand inefficiency as a concept. They understood correction. So they corrected. Each correction deepened the trap. Within 3 weeks, Karth expansion models diverged into incompatible outcomes. One projection demanded acceleration. Another demanded consolidation. A third recommended abandonment of entire sectors that were, by every metric, already compliant. Internal arbitration cycles increased. That should not have been possible. The Karth were not a hive. They were a dominion, distributed intelligence bound by consensus protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of fragmentation. Ward watched the telemetry in silence. "They're arguing," one of his team murmured. "Yes," Ward said, "for the first time." The Aurelians began to see it then. This was not deception. It was erosion. The Karth did not break because they were attacked. They broke because their certainty dissolved. Their models no longer converged on a single optimal path. Choice entered the system, and choice was poison. Karth units began to stall, awaiting higher-level resolution that never arrived. Others pressed forward, only to be recalled when updated directives contradicted previous orders. A few units shut down entirely, entering conservation states to avoid compounding inefficiency. The Dominion's advance fractured into hesitation. Valith stood beside Ward in the observation chamber, watching red vectors flicker and fade across the projection. "They're still inside our borders," she said quietly. Ward nodded. "They will be for a while. Then this isn't over." "No," he agreed. "This is the dangerous part. The Karth could still adapt. If they recognize the pattern, If they understood that the compact had stopped being an enemy and become an anomaly, it might respond in the only way that made sense to them, by erasing the anomaly entirely. Ward issued a single instruction: prepare Phase 2. The Aurelians did not ask what Phase 2 meant. They felt it. Civilian broadcasts shifted tone subtly, not defiant, not hopeful, but uncertain. Local governance fragmented just enough to obscure clear authority. Systems began making independent decisions that technically aligned with surrender protocols while contradicting one another in execution. The compact stopped behaving like a single entity. To the Karth, this was incomprehensible. You could conquer a civilization. You could not conquer a question. The first Karth withdrawal occurred without announcement. A single fleet reversed course, abandoning a system it had already secured, redeploying to a higher priority objective that dissolved the moment it arrived. Then another. Then three more. The Dominion's advance did not stop. It unraveled. Ward finally exhaled. "They're going to have to choose," he said. Valith looked at him. Between what? Ward's eyes never left the display. Between burning everything they touch, he said, or leaving something behind that they can't understand. And which will they choose? Ward was silent for a long moment. Whatever costs less, he said, at first. Outside the station, Karth ships began altering trajectories in ways no Aurelian strategist had ever seen. They were not retreating. They were avoiding. And avoidance to a dominion built on optimization was the closest thing to fear it could experience. Chapter 4. The Karth Dominion did not panic. That would have implied loss of control. Instead, it escalated. Across Aurelian space, dormant Karth units activated fail-safe directives that had never been observed before. Assimilation fleets ceased optimization routines and transitioned to purge protocols. Resource efficiency was no longer the priority. Certainty was. Entire systems went dark in coordinated waves, not conquered, not assimilated, simply erased. Planetary crusts were fractured, atmospheres stripped, infrastructure reduced to particulate debris and scattered into stellar gravity wells. The message was unmistakable. If the anomaly could not be corrected, it would be removed. Valith watched the first system die in silence. It had been lightly populated, strategically irrelevant, chosen precisely because its loss would not provoke an emotional response. The Karth were learning. "They're changing the rules," she said. Ward nodded grimly. "They're narrowing the problem." The Dominion had reached the same conclusion humanity once had in its own darkest eras. When optimization fails, simplify. When complexity resists control, destroy it. Phase 2 was no longer enough. Ward convened a meeting with compact leadership and did something no Aurelian strategist had ever witnessed a human do in wartime. He apologized. "We underestimated how quickly they'd accept inefficiency in exchange for certainty," he said. "That's on us." Valith stared at him. "Can this still work?" Ward did not answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally, "but it will cost you something you haven't lost yet." The Aurelians waited. "Your unity," Ward said. The compact had survived for millennia precisely because it was unified. Their governance was centralized, coherent, and consistent. It was the bedrock of their identity. Ward was asking them to dismantle it. "The Karth can erase systems," he continued. "They cannot erase what they cannot define. As long as you exist as a single, legible civilization, you remain targetable." Valith's mandibles trembled slightly. "You want us to fracture ourselves." "I want you to become unclassifiable," Ward said, "voluntarily." The room erupted in protest. This was not surrender. This was cultural suicide. Ward let the objections burn themselves out. "When humanity faced existential threats we couldn't defeat," he said quietly, "we learned something brutal. Survival doesn't always mean continuity. Sometimes it means allowing yourself to change so completely that the thing hunting you no longer recognizes you as prey. The Aurelians fell silent. Valeth understood the implication immediately. Independent systems, autonomous governance, fragmented identity, thousands of semi-sovereign enclaves instead of one unified compact. The Karth could not optimize against that, because there would be no single objective to eliminate. How long would this fragmentation last? She asked. Ward met her gaze. Longer than the war, he said. Possibly forever. The decision took 12 hours. That alone spoke volumes. When the compact dissolved, it did so legally, peacefully, and in full compliance with its own ancient charters. Authority devolved to system-level councils. Shared command structures were archived, not destroyed. Cultural records were duplicated and distributed beyond any single point of failure. The Aurelians did not collapse. They dispersed. To the Karth, the target vanished. Expansion models failed outright. What had once been a civilization was now a cloud of semi-independent actors with no unified behavior to optimize against. Purge protocols triggered repeatedly and resolved nowhere. The Dominion hesitated. That hesitation saved lives. Karth fleets withdrew from high-risk sectors, abandoning purge operations that consumed disproportionate resources without producing stable outcomes. Systems were bypassed. Regions were marked as non-viable. Within weeks, the invasion ground to a halt. Within months, Karth presence dwindled to isolated observation units. They did not declare defeat. They did something far more telling. They updated their models. Aurelian space was reclassified from correctable anomaly to persistent inefficiency. In Dominion logic, that was the closest thing to an admission of failure. Valeth stood with Ward in the quiet aftermath, watching stars that should have been lost still burn. "We survived," she said. Ward nodded. "Yes, but we are no longer what we were." Ward turned to her. "Neither are we." Humanity had not emerged unchanged from its own history. Survival had reshaped it into something fractured, adaptive, and endlessly argumentative. That was why this had worked. The humans had not taught the Aurelians how to fight. They had taught them how to stop being a problem worth solving. When the last Karth fleet crossed the border and did not return, no celebration followed. There was only silence and relief. Ward and his team prepared to depart. No treaties were signed. No alliances formalized. As Valeth watched the human ship undock, she felt a question press against her thoughts. One she had avoided since the beginning. She voiced it now. "Why didn't you take command?" she asked. "You could have." Ward smiled faintly. "Because," he said, "command is what makes you legible." The ship vanished into jump space. The Aurelians turned inward not to rebuild what they had lost, but to decide what they would become. The war was over, but the consequences had only begun. Chapter 5. The Karth Dominion never returned. They did not send scouts. They did not probe defenses. They did not test the new shape of Aurelian space. Their absence was not dramatic. It was methodical, consistent, and permanent. To the Dominion, the region had ceased to be useful. That fact carried more weight than any victory declaration ever could. In the months that followed, the former Aurelian compact struggled, not with reconstruction but with identity. Systems that had once taken orders now made decisions. Councils that had once deferred now argued. Trade routes realigned based on local need rather than centralized efficiency. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was alive. Valeth no longer held the title of High Strategist. There was no such position anymore. She served now as one voice among many on her home systems council, advising when asked, listening more than she spoke. Sometimes she missed the clarity of command. Most of the time she did not. She studied reports from across the dispersed Aurelian worlds. Cultural divergence accelerated. Art styles mutated. Political philosophies that had once been suppressed by the need for unity blossomed wildly. Some systems reconnected, others drifted apart by choice. And through it all, something remarkable happened. No single failure threatened everyone. Losses occurred, localized conflicts, economic collapses, environmental disasters, but they stayed contained. There was no longer a central structure whose collapse would cascade outward. The Aurelians had become resilient, not strong in the way they once defined it, but unfinishable. Years later, Valeth received a message routed through channels she hadn't accessed since the war. Human encryption. Old, familiar. It was from Elia's ward. The message was short. Checking in, looks like you're still here. Valeth allowed herself a rare smile. She replied simply, we are, scattered, complicated, still arguing. The response came hours later. Good. That usually means you're hard to erase. That was the last communication she ever received from him. Humanity did not linger in the aftermath of its interventions. It never had. Wherever they went, they left behind consequences, not caretakers. They understood something most species struggled to accept. No one should remain powerful long enough to become inevitable. Across the galaxy, word spread, not of a great battle won, but of a civilization that had survived by refusing to remain legible. Strategic doctrines shifted quietly. Some species experimented with decentralization. Others scoffed and dismissed it as cultural weakness. Those species were noted. Humanity noted them, not with hostility, with caution. On Earth, the war barely registered in public memory. It appeared briefly in academic circles, in think tank discussions about asymmetric conflict and post-centralized survival models. No monuments were built. No veterans paraded. Elia's ward returned to a life that looked unremarkable to anyone watching from the outside. He taught. He argued with colleagues. He voted in local elections that frustrated him deeply. Sometimes, late at night, he reread old reports and wondered whether the line humanity walked, between intervention and arrogance, was still where it needed to be. He never found a final answer. That, too, was intentional. Humanity had learned long ago that certainty was more dangerous than ignorance. Certainty built empires. Certainty erased alternatives. Certainty made extinction feel justified. So they cultivated doubt instead. They argued. They hesitated. They split authority and questioned motives and slowed decisions until only the ones that truly mattered survived the process. It drove the rest of the galaxy mad. It kept the galaxy alive. Long after the Karth Dominion faded into obscurity, its expansion stalled not by defeat but by irrelevance. Historians attempted to summarize the conflict in concise terms. They failed. There was no great battle to point to, no decisive moment where victory turned, no single weapon or maneuver that could be credited. There was only a shift. A civilization stopped trying to win, and in doing so stopped being something that could be beaten. The phrase entered galactic lexicon eventually, stripped of its original context, reused whenever brute force failed and creativity remained. They didn't send an army. They sent humanity. It did not mean compassion. It did not mean mercy. It meant something far more unsettling. That somewhere out there existed a species that would not fight you on your terms, would not validate your assumptions, and would not stop until the problem you represented ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Not by destroying you, but by making you unnecessary. Valeth stood one evening beneath a sky no longer patrolled by warships and considered how close everything had come to ending. She realized, with a quiet clarity, that humanity had never saved her people. They had taught them how to save themselves. And then they had left, before gratitude could turn into dependence. The stars burned on. Civilizations rose and fell. And somewhere, humans continued to argue with one another about what should be done, whether it was right, and how to prevent themselves from ever becoming the thing others would need saving from. That argument never ended, which was why humanity endured.